courage, confidence, imposter syndrome. Those are some of the topics that we covered in today's episode with Loree Phillip. Make sure to listen. I know you'll be as inspired by her energy as I was. Welcome to the Courage to Be podcast. I'm your host, Tanya Vasallo. And each week, I will bring you amazing guests so that you can tap into the courage to break out of old patterns and live your soul's purpose. Before we get into this episode, if by the end you enjoyed it, please follow, rate, review, and share the podcast so we can reach more people. Because here's the thing, I'm on a mission to close the gender gap in the podcasting world so that more and more women's voices are heard. If you feel that this is something you value too, then please take action by rating, reviewing, following, and sharing the podcast. We can only do this together. Check out the link in the show notes to see how this is done. And make sure to stay until the end to claim some free gifts I have for you. Welcome back to the Courage to Be, where we have powerful conversations to transform your life and your business. And today we have Loree Phillip with us. Loree, how are you?
Tanya, I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yay, I'm excited too. I'm excited to hear your story, your moments of courage, and your own personal story and your business and everything else. So start us from the beginning. What is your story? What kind of work do you do and how have you arrived here?
Oh, my story. Oh my goodness. So it wasn't that long ago, about a little over a year ago, I was working at a big company, Boeing. I had been working there for 16 years. And it was my last day because I had decided in that last year that I wanted to make a huge change in my career. And it was sort of one of those things where if you would have asked me 3 years prior to that, like, you're going to leave Boeing, start a business, figure it out, chart your own path, I would have said, you're crazy, Tanya, you're crazy. That is not me, because up until that point, I was very flowing with the sea of life. I got my degree, I got a job, I stayed at that job, I just kind of moved to the next position, and it was very, very safe. And I was really proud of it because it's like, oh, this is great. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get an education, get a great job, and just continue doing that. But during the pandemic, I started to see it differently because the pandemic really brought a lot out. People were worried about their health, their families. People were dying from this illness. And it really brought to the perspective to me of how limited of time we have on this planet and how much my time is valuable. And I never really thought about it that way because it was just time. And I thought, you know what? Is this what I want to be doing for another 15 years? Because I was looking at my career with fresh eyes and I didn't like what I saw. I was doing a good job, but it wasn't making an impact. It didn't feel meaningful. It was just this corporate stuff every day, doing whatever my boss told me for some executive, or being in these meetings where we're talking about the same problems and nothing's changing. And I just felt like I am wasting my time. I mean, I'm getting paid fairly well to do this work, but at the end of the day, is this what I want my career to look like? And the answer was no. And so I decided to make a change.
So what was the change? What work were you doing at Boeing? And what was the change once you made that decision?
Yeah, so this was a whole process in of itself. At Boeing, I had started out in finance, and then I went over to program management. And then the last 8 or 9 years, I was doing strategy for our military helicopter business, which is so crazy to me. It's like, I could care less about attack helicopters. I mean, I had pride in what we did because we were supporting troops and all of that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't something that really lit me up. But I had this epiphany and I thought, well, I don't want to be doing this, but what would I want to do instead? And I had not a clue, Tanya. I was like, up until that point, I never really asked myself that, like, what else would I do? And so it took about 7 months or so working with a coach to figure out, okay, if I had a blank sheet of paper and I got to choose, like, this is my dream career, what would I love to do? What aligns with my talents? What aligned with my passions? What am I good at? And I put this all together and I could get really excited about it. What would that look like? And I decided to explore coaching, and I got my certification while I was still working at Boeing. And so when I left, I already had quite a few pieces in place to know where I was going. So now I have a coaching business and I have a podcast, and I'm just taking one step forward at a time building that.
That is awesome. I love that you evaluated all these things, like, what is it that I want? What am I good at? Because sometimes it takes a little bit of soul searching. You made that decision, but did you make the decision knowing that you were already in coaching, or was the decision like, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I'll continue in Boeing and then leave once I figure it out?
Yeah, deciding to leave Boeing was a huge decision. And the term courage came up quite a bit actually when I was making that decision and deciding to do it, because I had this really solid, stable career that people were like, you're giving this up for what? Like, this business that I haven't even created, this idea, this sort of leap. And so I didn't know that it was going to be coaching. I didn't have a dream to go do coaching. I just knew that what really came through for me was I had been good at my job at Boeing. But this idea of what if I spent all my time and energy and focused it on something I loved, so focused it on something that I felt so passionate about, like, what kind of an impact could I make? And it just felt so powerful, Tanya. And I thought, I've got to figure this out, because I'm not happy any longer doing this job at Boeing. I felt like I could be doing more. And it took a year, even during the process, because I also had to not only convince myself, but convince my family that this was the right path, because I couldn't just jump out of a career. I felt like I couldn't just jump out of it without the support of my husband and my family. And I knew people were going to freak out and be like, what are you doing? You're crazy. And that did happen. I mean, I had to go through that experience before I got to the other side of it.
I love hearing this story, and I want to go back and just detangle a little bit this whole idea of making a decision, because you were giving, here's how I see it. I feel that human beings, we tend to not act until we have all our ducks in a row, where we have certainty, where we know, like, it would have been much easier to make that decision if you knew exactly what you were doing, how much you were going to get paid, what you were going to be, like that someone told you what it was all going to look like, and that you were going to be successful on the other side of that decision. But we tend not to do that, and we freeze. We're like, I don't think I'm going to do it because I don't know how. Or you just, if you don't know the how, we stop ourselves right there. So I really want to commend you for that, because you made the decision. And I'm a big believer. You make the decision, you have the courage to go through it, and then you're rewarded on the other side. And it sounds like that's what happened to you. And you were just revealed what the next step was, one moment after another. You couldn't be revealed the whole thing. Like, you're going to have a podcast, you're going to have a coaching business, you're going to have, now a TV network, you're going to be on TV. Like, these are the things that I really want to have you operated this way in your life, like always operated this way? Or are you the type of person that it's like, no, I'm not going to do it until I know how it's going to all pan out?
This is probably the most risky, biggest, like, perceived risk, right? It was outside of my character to do something like this, not only for myself, but from the perspective of my friends, family. They're like, where did this come from? I didn't know you had this in you. These types of things came out. And I got to the point where, and this happened through a lot of inner work, to be honest. Like once I really started to dive into my values, who I really was, what I love to do, like when I started really listening to my inner voice and where I really wanted to go, and I saw that, it was like, it wasn't that I was making this risky decision. It was my next step. And I could not turn back. It would have been to stay put after feeling and seeing and connecting with what I saw as my new journey. It would have been worse for me to stay put. I would have been miserable. I just wouldn't have been able to stay. And so I was so sure, not that my business was going to be super successful immediately, but I was so sure that I needed to be doing something else. And this was the general direction that it took. And the other piece was that came up for me in my exploration was my value of freedom. And I really, really just didn't want to have somebody control my time and my energy. I just didn't. I was done with it. And so there was a lot of exploration around, well, maybe I could just go to this other company in this other industry and see if that makes me feel better, more fulfilled. But at the end of the day, when I did the digging and I saw, what I really, really wanted was to be able to have full control of my destiny and my schedule and my time. And, like all these things came through. And so when I was really excited to do it. And it was just so amazing when it happened. And I will share with you a story about that, because on my last day at Boeing, I thought I would wake up and feel great. And I would be like, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to go. I had this imagery of me like walking out with a box of my stuff. I had been there since college for 16 years. So this was my only professional career. And I was like, this is feeling of freedom where I'm walking out with my box of stuff. And now I'm starting this new journey. And what happened was I woke up and I felt anxious and I felt worried and I felt a little bit of doubt. And I went on an early morning walk that day. And I live in sunny Arizona, but for whatever reason, it was a little rainy. And I looked up and I saw the most beautiful double rainbow I've ever seen. I snapped a bunch of pictures of it. And then I was like, took a breath and thought, you know what? I'm on the right path. The universe is supporting me because I'm following my heart. I'm following what my inner voice was telling me to do. And so all of that anxiety sort of melted away. And then I went in for that last day and got my box of stuff and walked out. And so it's not that we have to do it all on our own and we have to make these big, courageous decisions, but each step you get closer to really getting there. And that courage came over time.
This is awesome. What do you think that the anxiety and that fear, because like you said, anyone would think like, oh, she's all excited. I have a story like that too. When I quit corporate back in 2005, I walked into my boss's office and I had a good relationship with him. He was half German, half Spanish. So we could, we had a certain rapport with that too. And I honestly I would have kept on working with him. I just knew I was way overdue. I was expired by 2 years. I should have left 2 years before that. But the moment I walked in, I started bawling. And so it's kind of similar to yours, like a part of me felt like, oh my God, yes, I finally have this freedom. I gathered the courage. I'm doing it. I'm quitting corporate. I don't really know what the plan is. All I know is that I want to freelance and I want freedom. And here, why am I crying now? And why am I bawling in front of my boss, about this? Like if now you have like my boss consoling me. So what do you think that anxiety and that sadness that you were describing was all about?
I don't think I could have told you then, but my experience now looking back on it is that is part of us, a piece of us that isn't ready to be courageous, whether it's, part of us that's a little bit more timid or doubts herself from, whatever happened in our life, in our childhood. Those feelings in your body have been there for a long time and they come up, right? Like our body is designed in such a way to keep us safe. And when you start to go and do something new, it is so, so natural for your body to be like, are you sure? Because this doesn't feel safe. And, it's not like we're in the, back in the day where that safety would keep you from like getting eaten by a lion or something. But now it's still there and it's still saying, this is new, this is different. You've been doing the same thing for 16 years. I mean, generally speaking. And now you're out on your own and there are parts of you that are still going to freak out. And I think that's what came up for me. And I had to have a little bit more bigger picture sort of like inspiration and comfort that, you know what, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm supported. I had to basically parent myself and calm myself down in the sense of this is the right path. And that's what I think. I don't know what your perspective is, Tanya.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I wanted to hear it from your voice because I think it was fear showing up, like you're saying. And my next question was going to be about safety, and you just answered it without me having to ask it. Because yes, I do believe that we are wired, from thousands and thousands of years from our ancestors, our reptilian brain, to keep us safe. That's the job of our conscious mind, of our amygdala. They keep us safe. And to you, even though you weren't being attacked by a tiger, or like it might have been for our ancestors, that leaving a job that was secure, safe for the past 16 years it was like you're a tiger. It was like putting you in danger.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel that was fear. And I'm curious how do you deal with fears as they're showing up? Because it sounds like this was a big step to overcome that fear for you, but fears are constantly showing up for us. So how do you overcome your fears?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Tanya. I do feel like when you jump into entrepreneurship, it is the fastest path of personal growth that you can possibly take on because, to be honest, all of your fears pop right up because everywhere you turn, there's something uncomfortable that you didn't do before, that you didn't experience before, that you have to work through. So this is a constant thing, like you mentioned, fears are popping up. And it really, for me, depends on how deeply rooted the fear is. If it's like, okay, I'm just nervous, so I need to sit with it for a minute, feel it in my body, release it, and then just take action and do it. I mean, that's clearly a strategy to get beyond the fear and just get through it. I mean, you definitely don't want to ignore the feelings because they're there and they need to be addressed. But I'll tell you another quick story about this for me because the fear popped up for me in a very, very big way several months after I left Boeing. And I was trying to get my feet wet in being an entrepreneur and having a business. And I was sitting in a conference and there was this beautiful inspirational speaker. And she asked us this question. She said, how will you allow success to see you? And I will tell you, Tanya, that hit me like a ton of bricks because with that question, and you know how powerful questions are, I felt like crap. I'm hiding. I am hiding. I am not putting myself out there from a business perspective. I'm not talking about what I'm doing. I'm a lurker on social media. I'm not doing any of this stuff. And it came back to, I had this fear of being seen. I had this fear of being in the spotlight. I had always been that good go-to behind the scenes person. And if I was asked to present, I would do it and that would be fine, but I wasn't volunteering to do it. And it was just like, I'd rather be support on the team than be out in front leading the charge. And now I had to step into this leadership position where I had to be okay with being seen because it doesn't matter how great you are if nobody knows about you, right? And so what came out of that for me was I decided that I was going to start a podcast. And that was how I managed that fear, because I realized that I needed a way to show up consistently every single week. I needed a way to start exploring and letting my voice out and getting comfortable speaking from a place of authenticity and bringing that forward. And so I decided I'm going to do this podcast, and it scared me to death, Tanya. I posted on LinkedIn, I said, hey, I'm starting this podcast. It should be coming out at the end of the month. And I was laying on the floor, deep breathing. Basically, if you can imagine, like I had a brown paper bag and I was breathing into the bag. That's how I felt, because I was like, man, I just put this out there and now have to make it happen. And I had not even recorded one single word. And it was like, I ripped the Band-Aid. But the reason why I bring this up is because it was scary and I was nervous. But over time, it just got easier and easier and easier. So I recorded my first episode, and then I recorded my second episode, and then my third. And then fast forward to just a few months later, I was doing a live show. Like I was on a radio show live, and I was the guest, and I was comfortable. And I went from this place of, I'm scared to be in the spotlight. I'm nervous recording my own podcast, not live, but I can edit it and do it again and do it again and do it again until I like it enough to share it with the world. But to a place of comfort speaking about myself on a live radio show. And that is one of the biggest examples I have recently of me overcoming a fear. And it just feels like it's popping up again and again and again. And I have to go through the feelings and then figure out, okay, how am I going to get through this?
I love this, Loree, and I'm seeing it also with different eyes too. You know, I've been a coach in training and soon to be certified with the Napoleon Hill Institute. And one of the first principles that Napoleon Hill talks about is decision making. And again, you started this example. You said, I made a decision to start a podcast. So it all starts with decision making, and then you're going to be confronted with fears. So I love that example and how you did it, because first you started with the decision, then you're like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do it. Then you did the live. You're like, okay, I'm starting a podcast. You're like, oh shoot, now I'm being held accountable to this. And, you know, you're following that goal, that purpose that you have. And I love that you just put it out there, but just sharing the part of how it got more comfortable once you started doing it. Don't you feel that sometimes we cheat ourselves out and it's easier to just stay in our comfort zone versus stretching, going to the next level and making that next level comfortable? Because that's what you did. You went from, oh my God, I'm petrified of starting a podcast and being visible. I mean, talk about being visible. It's going to put you out there. People are going to hear your voice. You're going to be judged. You're going to be criticized, you know, all those little inner gremlins and fears that you have. But then once you did that and overcame that fear, the reward was, oh, okay, now you're comfortable being on a live radio show. You know, it's not even like a pre-recorded that you can edit it or whatever.
I was amazed with that. I'd like to add something to that, because what I noticed with the decision making, and this is what made a big difference for me to get myself out of the comfort zone where I wouldn't have otherwise. So when I was in corporate, I wasn't trying to get out of my comfort zone. I wasn't making decisions to stretch myself. And I think the difference for me is when I really internalize why I needed to get past this fear was so important to me, because I realized that I wouldn't really be able to have a successful business unless I could get more comfortable putting myself and my business out there. It was just one of those things I internalized as so important. And when I realized that, then I made the decision, because it was worth it going through that sort of those fears and that stretching and that anxiety a bit was worth it, knowing on the other side I was tracking towards where I wanted to be ultimately, because I left Boeing. And I'm like, I'm going to make this work. I want to make a difference. I want to build this business, and with the intention that I can't just let this fear stop me. And so if you go back to that why, and if you're trying to do something that's important to you, you're more likely to be willing to stretch yourself to get there.
That is beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. So many questions that are popping into my head from that. What is your big why? You said when you have that why, what's your why for you?
My why for me, it's really that I could create a career for myself it's twofold. It's doing something I love, enjoy, that brings me, joy, and makes a difference for other people, has an impact. So I could get paid to do something I love, and I can make a positive impact with other people. And I'm choosing to focus in on women and supporting women. And it's just so near and dear to my heart, I am still a woman, but having been in corporate, going through having a career and understanding all of the struggles that women go through when they're trying to do that and raise a family and be successful and be a great partner. And so that is my North Star. And I think there's also a bit of pride in, I want to create it. I want to, that the idea of, if I can make this all work, like I can do it, and that success that comes out of it, versus like I was working for another company, and in a sense their success was my success, but this is me creating from my heart, and that is my why. And I am not going back to corporate America if I can help it. So there's a bit of also like, not that.
I love it. I feel the same way. And it's just that it goes back down to what are our values. And when you said my value of freedom, I'm like, oh my God, I'm of Loree's group. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel the same way. What would you say to people, to anyone that's at a job, corporate, teachers, any type of job that they're there, maybe enjoying it 10, 20% of the time, but like 80% of the time, they're just doing it because it gives them safety and it gives them a paycheck, but they want something bigger for themselves. Like they know deep down that there's a bigger calling for them. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think the most important thing they can do is continue to listen to themselves, that calling. What is it telling them? Don't push it down. Don't push it away. I believe that one of the first acts of self-love is to listen to yourself. And so if there is something there questioning, telling you that you are meant for more, that you could be doing more, you can be doing more, it is true. And if your heart is desiring that, you can make it happen. And I understand the part of safety, because I totally can relate to being in a nice, safe, stable job. So you don't have to make this huge, big leap, but you can start to listen to yourself. You could start to ask yourself some more questions about, well, what would you love to do? And just give yourself some space to explore that a bit and get some ideas around it. And even if it's not your full-time job, you can start to, if it's a different career, get a little training, do some volunteer work, start to bring more of what you love to do in your life. And you will slowly start to unravel the pieces that will give you more strength to make that ultimate decision. But I don't think people are not ready to make a big decision like leaving their job until they're ready. And it's a journey, and you'll know it. But I think that's actually where it starts, is this questioning, this wondering, this sort of, what, this isn't for me really anymore. And it's okay if you've outgrown your job. Like, I loved my job. I was so proud, Tanya, of my job. When I started at Boeing, I was making more as an entry-level financial analyst than my mom was making after being a teacher for 15 plus years. And so my family was so proud of me. I was so proud of me. I was so excited to be there. And the piece that came up for me when I was exploring what else I would want to do is this idea of deserving. Like, I didn't feel like I could deserve more because I already had so much. And so it goes back to, I would tell anybody out there who's thinking about, what else could I be doing? I feel like I could be doing more. You can, and you deserve it. And your time and your energy and your life is yours. And just take some more time every day to start to explore it and journal and think about what you really love to do, because it's worth it. It is worth it to be able to spend, how much time do we spend working? It's like such a big part of our lives to be unhappy and unfulfilled while you do it.
What about that? That's great. And I'm putting myself in the position of someone that does have a job and is like, oh, well, that sounds awesome. But that money, is like, I need to contribute to my family. I have kids' college to fund. And I have, again, going back to security. In my opinion, it's a false security. And it was proven with COVID, like we think that we'll have our job forever, that we won't be the ones let go of, that a pandemic won't happen, like just all these different things. Like we just think that because we get a paycheck every single week or every month or whatever, that we're immune to this. But what do you say to the person that's scared of like, oh, well, that's perfect. That sounds good for her because she has the backing, or like, how do you develop that faith or that trust that things are going to be okay, or that they're going to work out?
It is a little bit of a leap of faith. And that's why you have to be really sure within yourself of what you really want to do, because you have to have a conviction around it. Not just what you don't want to do is leave your job in a state of fear. You don't want to leave your job because you're unhappy, but you don't really even know anything about what you want to do. The best thing you can do is figure out what you would love and come from a place of love and motivation when you leave. But the other thing is, I think you're right. It is a false sense of security, but there are things you can do to mitigate it in terms of saving. Also, what I continue to tell myself today is that your one job is not the only job in the world. Like, if I decided today, you know what, I do need the money all of a sudden, I could go get a job in corporate at the same company I was at a different company. Maybe I would even take a different type of role. But there are a lot of options available. It's not like you're leaving that job and there's no other jobs and there's no other opportunities. And in fact, I will tell you, Tanya, that, and I mentioned this earlier, I've grown more as a person in the last year than I had in the previous 5 years. I would probably go in and be even more solid contributor and leader at any company I would be going into interview with, because the type of experience you will get figuring out how to start a business or do something different, people value that and value that ability to make those risks and have that courage to do that.
Yes, I agree 100%. Let's shift gears a little bit with your coaching. What type of coaching do you do?
Yeah, so right now I'm focused on supporting women leaders. And what I really love to work with them on is really strengthening their authentic confidence. So this would be someone who's, say, in a professional career in corporate, and they're not looking to leave, but they would like to move up and do it in such a way where they can stay true to themselves. Because right now in the corporate environment, there is a lot of concern, I think, with women in particular, of, okay, hey, I do want to go to that next level, but I look and I see what it looks like. And the current role model in that position is doing it in such a way that does not align with myself. Like, I would have to work 80 hours a week and I would have to, spend less time with my family, and the values are not there. And so I work with women to really get to the root of their values, their priorities, deepening their self-belief and their self-trust so they can bring out their voice and be really strong rooted in who they are as they move up into their careers.
That's awesome. We need more women like you helping the other women so that we can all rise together. It's wonderful. As you were saying that, I heard, like raising their confidence. What do you think goes first, confidence or courage?
I think courage comes before confidence, to be honest, because there's a lot of ways to build confidence, but one of the most powerful ways is by the act of doing. And you have to have the courage to try. And so in order to raise your confidence, you could get comfortable in your belief that you could try something new and learn it. And so when we look at where we're positioning societally and culturally, we want women to be taking on these bigger leadership roles and moving into the C-suite in these more powerful positions, but we're not giving them the tools to be successful because it is outside of their comfort zone. Everything is new. And so when you start to deepen your self-belief, what you're really believing in is that you can learn and that you can figure it out. And that comes through experience and trusting yourself over again and seeing the results of, you know what, I was able to learn this. That means I can also learn that. But it does take courage to put yourself out there and to try to take that first step is the courage that comes first. And then you start to gain the confidence.
Yeah, that's great. With the confidence, courage piece of it, I feel like they go very hand in hand. And I have to agree with you, like you do have to do first, jump in, rip off that Band-Aid, have that courage, and then you'll feel proud of yourself or excited. You'll be like, oh my God, I did it. It's no different than how we learn when we're kids. You jump into the pool for the first time or you dive and you're like, oh my God, I did it. You were petrified. You were so scared, but you jumped off that diving board and you do it. And then you get more confident, more bold with it. So thank you for sharing that. What about imposter syndrome? How did that show up for you at all? Because I see a lot of women, and especially as we're trying to navigate new uncharted waters, like you're saying, it's new ways of being, of doing things within work, within our business. How did that show up for you and what did you do about it?
Yeah, I actually love this topic of imposter syndrome because it is part of life. And when you look at the numbers, I don't know what the percentage is. It's a very high percentage of people that feel imposter syndrome in some way, shape, or form in their lives. It's not a small club. It's actually a very big club. And I love to flip it on its head and tell people who are feeling this way, great job. Like the only way to feel this imposter syndrome is because you're stretching outside of your comfort zone. You're choosing to grow. You're choosing to make that next step. You're not trying to just stay put, doing the same thing over and over again. And just because you're doing that, you end up sort of feeling this way a bit. And that's okay. It's part of being a human. And it goes back to what you're talking about earlier with the way our bodies are made in terms of keeping us safe. And so you start to get better at dealing with it in the sense of, you know what, growing your confidence around, I can do this because I've done it before. But also what came up for me, I mean, from my perspective, imposter syndrome comes up often because like I started a podcast, I'd never done it before. And all of a sudden now I'm a podcaster. Okay, like what qualifies me to do that? It's because I have one now. Like I just decided I'm going to do it. And now that's my title. And you know what? That is true. I'm not aspiring to be a podcaster. I am one. I have one. And so you have to sort of step into your beliefs about yourself because it goes back to a decision, really. And I was talking on my podcast with a book coach who I was saying, you know, what about the people out there that feel like they're not writers? And she said that she didn't feel like she was a writer, but then she realized that a writer is someone who decides to write. And it's like, you know what? You could extrapolate that out and say, you can be anything you decide that you are going to do. And then you start doing the things that the writer does. That writer writes, the podcaster does. The podcaster makes podcasts. You know what I mean? Like, you go and you start doing it, and then you become it. And that's another big part of kind of getting out of this idea of I'm an imposter. Well, actually, I'm not, because you can go out and find my podcast. So it is what it is, but those feelings come up.
I love it. I love how you said, you can decide to be a writer, you can decide to be a podcaster, and you choose fill in the blank with whatever you want. That's how you overcome imposter syndrome. What a great answer, Loree. I wrote it down too. I was like, oh, that's great. Well, let me ask you this. Where can people find you?
Yes, absolutely. I would love if you enjoying this conversation, you would love my podcast, Daring to Leap. You can find it wherever you're listening to Tanya's podcast, Courage to Be. You can find mine, just type it right in. That would be great. Or you can look me up on Instagram.
That's awesome. We'll have this information in the show notes too. But as we're wrapping up, what's one thing that our listeners can do to live a life with more courage?
Yes, I think the one thing you can do is realize your value. Because once you internalize your value and the importance that this life is to you, because it is about you, and that's great. I mean, that we have to get past this idea of being selfish, because our lives are about us. We're the ones who are living it. We are the writers of our life story. We get to decide. And once you can internalize that, how important this life is for you, you can start to get the courage to ask yourself in almost any moment, what do I want? And then have the courage to actually go for it.
I love it. Thanks so much, Loree. We'll have to do a follow-up with this one. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
your time.
Thanks for having me, Tanya. This has been a blast.
Thank you.
I am so grateful that you joined me today. If you enjoyed it, there's one thing I'd like you to do. Click on the follow button so you don't miss a single episode. Leave me a rating and a review, and please share. As my way to thank you, email us a screen grab of your review at the email in the show notes, and we will send you a free Crafting Your Future guided visualization, which is so simple to do with outstanding results. It will empower you and give you the confidence to attract and create the life you've always desired. See you in our next episode.